to the Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all third graders out there, though all children are welcome to tune in. This lesson is the second in our series. If you didn't see our previous lesson, you can find it on the Tennessee Department of Education website at www.tn.gov/education. My name is Miss Copeland. I'm a third grade teacher at Venus Stewart Elementary in Gallatin, Tennessee. I'm so excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to my classroom. I am missing my students in my own classroom. Every day I want to share a note with one student. So today's note is for Carol. And Carol, I sure do miss seeing you every day. Your sweet spirit and beautiful smile light up our classroom. I hope that you are doing well. Love, Miss Copeland. In the previous lesson, we began reading the classic children's story, The Wind in the Willows. Today, you will need your papers from the previous lesson about mole and rat that we wrote on yesterday, and you will need 5 more pieces of paper. Before we dive into the text, let's discuss a few words we will see in our text today. The first word is perspective. What's the word? Perspective. Perspective is a noun. Perspective is how someone sees or experiences something. Here is an example of how to use the word. Her perspective changed after talking to her friends. The next word is where. Where is a noun. Where is a small dam or river in a river or stream. Here is an example of how to use the word. Small animals created a where using sticks in the stream. And the last word is spontaneous. What's the word? Spontaneous. Spontaneous is an adjective. Spontaneous means having said or done something without having been planned. Here is an example of how to use the word. The group broke out in spontaneous laughter. Great, now let's take a moment to think about what we read yesterday. Here's what I remember. First, Mole grows weary of spring cleaning and leaves his burrow to go above ground. He meanders along the river and meets the water rat. Water rat tells Mole about life on the river as rat rows along the river. Mole learns about life on the river from speaking to rat. What do we call the part of a story where the characters speak to one another? Hopefully you remembered from yesterday that is called dialogue. Dialogue is one way an author can describe a person, place, or thing, or give the reader information in a story. When you're reading a story by yourself, how do you know when you're reading dialogue? Dialogue has quotation marks. So here's a piece of our story that we will read today. Let me read it to you and figure out where we need quotation marks. He'll be out of the boat in a minute if he rolls like that, said the rat. So here I see that the rat is saying these words out loud, so I need to add quotation marks around what he's saying. He'll be out of the boat in a minute if he rolls like that. The rat is saying that out loud. So that is called dialogue. Do you know the name of the part of the story that tells what is happening and does not have quotation marks around it? That is called narration. So let's read this part together. However, Toad, for it was he, shook his head and concentrated on the task at hand. This part does not have dialogue. No one is talking or saying those words out loud. So this part is called narration. The narrator is telling us this part of the story. Narration and dialogue are 2 literary tools or 2 ways the author tells the story, through dialogue and through narration. What was the setting of the previous read aloud? It was Mole's house and the river. Through whose eyes do we first discover the riverbank? We see it through Mole's eyes. The author tells us Mole is in awe of the river. This is called perspective. We learned this word earlier. Perspective is how someone sees or experiences something. In fictional stories, perspective is another literary tool, like dialogue and narration, that lets the reader know from whose experience the scene of the story is mainly being described. Like dialogue, perspective can shift from one character to another as a way of telling more about the story. It is in Mole's house and with his actions and dialogue that the entire story begins, and it is from Mole's perspective that the reader first hears about the above-ground world in the riverbank. So we can determine a character's perspective by their actions and by their words, by their dialogue. Today you will be introduced to 3 new animal characters: an otter, a badger, and a toad. Go ahead and label one of your pieces of paper to say otter. One to say badger. And one to say toad. We will use the same pieces throughout the story and add to them as we go. Adult otters are around 25 to 35 inches in length, not including their tail, which can be 14 to 18 inches long. Otters live in and around the water. Like badgers, otters also belong to the weasel family. Otters are playful creatures and great swimmers. They are semi-aquatic, meaning they spend time in and out of water like water rats. They have brownish fur on their backs, green-colored bellies, long, strong necks, webbed feet, and a long, flattened tail. They live in burrows that they dig into riverbanks or in hollowed-out trees near rivers, streams, or ponds. Otters eat fish, shellfish, birds, insects, and frogs. Otters have backbones. Their skeletons are inside their bodies. They are warm-blooded mammals. Their babies are born alive and their mothers feed them milk from their own bodies. Let's get started. So here's our second part of our story, part 2, the riverbank. Leaving the main stream, they now passed into what seemed like a little landlocked lake. Green grass sloped down to either edge. Brown, snaky tree roots gleamed below the surface of the quiet water. Ahead of them could be heard the foamy tumble of a ware with a restless, dripping mill wheel attached to a mill house. Remember, a ware is a type of dam or structure that holds water back. A mill is a building that contains machinery for grinding wheat into flour. The scene was so beautiful that the mole could only hold up both forepaws and gasp, "Oh my!" The rat brought the boat alongside the bank and tied it up. Then he helped the still awkward mole safely ashore and swung out the luncheon basket. The mole asked to be allowed to unpack it all by himself. The rat was very pleased to indulge him. Mole excitedly shook out the tablecloth and spread it. Then, one by one, he took out the mysterious packets and carefully arranged them, still gasping, "Oh my, oh my." When all was ready, the rat said, "Eat up, old fellow." And the mole, who started his spring cleaning at a very early hour, had not eaten since then, eagerly set to work. "What are you looking at?" said the rat presently, when the edge of their hunger was somewhat dulled, and the mole's eyes were able to wander off the tablecloth. "I am looking," said the mole, "at a streak of bubbles that I see traveling along the surface of the water." "Bubbles? Oh," said the rat cheerily. A broad, glistening muzzle showed itself above the edge of the bank, and the otter hauled himself out and shook the water from his coat. "Greedy beggars," he observed. "Why didn't you invite me, Ratty?" "This was a spontaneous affair," explained the rat. "By the way, meet my friend, Mr. Mole." "Proud, I'm sure," said the otter, and the two animals were friends forthwith. "Such a rumpus everywhere," continued the otter. "The entire world seems to be out on the river today. I came up this backwater to try to get a moment's peace, and then stumbled upon you fellows." Let's pause our story for a moment. We met a new character in this section. Take a moment to think about what you might have learned already about Otter based on his words and actions. Jot your notes about Otter on your Otter paper. You can also add anything new to your mole and rat papers. Pause the video if you need more time to think. At that moment, there was a rustling sound behind them. It seemed to come from a hedge wherein last year's leaves still clung. Seconds later, a stripy head with high shoulders peered out from within. "Come on, old badger," shouted the rat. The badger trotted forward, then grunted, company," and turned his back and disappeared from view. "That's just the sort of fellow he is," observed the disappointed rat. "Simply hates society. Now we shan't see any more of him today." "Well, tell us, who's out on the river?" "Toad's out for one," replied the otter. "In his brand new wager boat. New togs or special clothes, new everything." The two animals looked at each other and laughed. "Once it was nothing but sailing," said the rat. "Then he tired of that and took to punting," which is boating in a flat-bottomed boat in shallow water using a pole to push the boat along. Nothing would please him but to punt all day. Last year it was houseboating, and we all had to stay with him in his houseboat and pretend we liked it. It's all the same, whatever he takes up. He gets tired of it and starts on something fresh. "Such a good fellow too," remarked the otter reflectively, "but no stability, especially in a boat." Let's pause for a moment. Mole learns about Toad through dialogue between rat and otter. What words could you use to describe Toad? Yes, some words you might have said are easily bored, a good fellow, or no stability. We met two characters in this section, Badger and Toad. Take a moment to think about what you may have learned about Badger or Toad based on their words and actions. Jot your thoughts on your Badger and Toad paper. You could also add anything new to your Mole, Rat, and Otter papers. Pause the video if you need more time to think. From where they sat, they could get a glimpse of the main stream across the island that separated them. And just then, a wager boat flashed into view. The rower was a short, stout figure who was splashing badly and rolling a good deal, but working his hardest. The rat stood up and hailed him. However, Toad, for it was he, shook his head and concentrated on the task at hand. "He'll be out of the boat in a minute if he rolls like that," said the rat. "Of course he will," chuckled the otter. "Did I ever tell you that good story about Toad and the lock keeper?" A lock keeper is a person in charge of lifting or lowering the gates as the boat travels up or down. "The story happens this way," Otter continued. "Toad—" At that moment, a mayfly swerved unsteadily on the gentle spring breeze toward Otter. There was a swirl of water and a cloop, and the mayfly was visible no more. Neither was the otter. Mole looked down. The voice was still in his ears, but the grass whereon he had sprawled was clearly vacant, not an otter to be seen. But again there was a streak of bubbles on the surface of the river. The rat hummed a tune, and the mole remembered that it was considered rude to make any sort of comment about the sudden disappearance of one's friends. "Well, well," said the rat, "I suppose we ought to be moving. I wonder which one of us should pack the luncheon basket." He did not sound overly eager to do it himself. "Oh, please let me," said the mole. So, of course, the rat let him. The afternoon sun was getting low as the rat sculled gently homeward. The mole was very full of lunch and self-satisfaction, and already quite at home in a boat, or so he thought. He was, however, getting a bit restless, and presently he said, "Ratty, please, I want to row now." The rat shook his head with a smile. "Not yet, my young friend," he said. "Wait till you've had a few lessons." The mole was quiet for a minute or two, but he began to feel more and more jealous of Rat. Suddenly, he jumped up and seized the sculls, or oars, from him. Rat, who had been gazing out over the water, was taken by surprise. He fell backwards off his seat. The triumphant mole took his place and grabbed the sculls with much confidence. "Stop it, you silly!" cried the rat from the bottom of the boat. "You'll have us over." Let's pause for a moment. Take a moment and think, why does Mole suddenly jump up and seize the sculls or oars? Write your answer on your paper. So I would add this to my mole paper. Thinking about why he took the oars. Mole is jealous and prideful for a moment and wants to show Rat that he can row just as well. What did Rat mean when he said in his dialogue, "You'll have us over"? How does this help us understand Rat's perspective of the situation? Say your answer out loud. Here is what I was thinking. Rat is afraid that Mole will turn the boat over. From Rat's perspective, Mole does not have enough experience to row the boat. The mole flung his sculls back with a flourish and made a great dig at the water. He missed the surface altogether. His legs flew up above his head and he found himself lying on top of the rat. Greatly alarmed, he made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment, sploosh. The word sploosh is an example of an onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a technique that uses words to imitate sounds. Over went the boat, and Mole found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and oh, how very wet it felt. How it sang in his ears as he went down, down, down. How bright and welcome the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and spluttering. How black was his despair when he felt himself sinking again. Then a firm paw gripped him by the back of his neck. It was the rat, and he was laughing. The rat got hold of the skull and shoved it under Mole's arm. Then he did the same by the other side of him, and swimming behind, propelled the helpless animal to shore. When the rat had rubbed him down and wrung some of the wet out of him, he said, "Now then, old fellow, trot up and down till you're warm and dry again, while I dive for the luncheon basket." So the dismal mole, wet without and ashamed within, trotted about till he was fairly dry, while the rat plunged into the water again. He recovered the boat, fetched his floating property, and finally dived successfully for the luncheon basket. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the actions of Mole and Rat in the last two sections. Take a moment to think about how their actions help you understand more about them. Jot your thoughts on your mole and rat papers. Pause the video if you need more time. So I'm thinking, what can I learn here about mole and rat based on their actions in this section of the text? When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlor. He planted the mole in an armchair in front of it. He fetched down a dressing gown and slippers for him and told him river stories till supper time. Supper was a most cheerful meal. Shortly afterwards, a sleepy mole had to be escorted or helped upstairs by his host to the guest bedroom. There he laid his head on his pillow and in great peace and contentment. This was just the beginning of their friendship and time together on the river. Let's pause for a moment. Is Rat angry with the dejected mole? How do you know? Say your answer out loud. I was thinking, no, Rat is laughing as he helps Mole to safety. Rat speaks cheerily to Mole after the incident. Rat arranges for Mole to come to his house. Rat escorts Mole to his bedroom. Do we learn this through dialogue or narration? We learned this through narration in this section. The characters were not speaking aloud, but the narrator was telling us this part of the story. Think about the actions of Rat in this section. Jot some additional thoughts on your paper. Pause the video if you need more time to think. Let's think a little more about the part of Wind in the Willows that we read today. Today we added 3 new characters, Otter, Toad, and Badger. Are Otter, Toad, and Badger the main characters of this story so far? Or are Water Rat and Mole still the main characters? Pick up the pieces of paper who were the main characters today. I hope you picked up Mole and Rat. They are still the main characters. Remember, perspective is the experience or eyes of the character through which a part of the story is told. From whose perspective is today's read aloud told? Pick up that character's paper. I hope you picked up Mole's paper. Today was told from his perspective. Have you ever heard anyone say, "Let bygones be bygones"? What words do you hear in the word bygones? By and gone. A bygone is something that has already happened and something that has already gone by. This is a proverb that means one should forget about past events that may have caused bad feelings. How do Rat's actions express this saying? Say your answer out loud. I remember that when Mole and Rat are back in the boat and Mole is apologizing for his behavior, Rat says to Mole, "Don't you think any more about it." Instead of saying, "Don't you think any more about it," Rat could have said to Mole, "Let bygones be bygones." Rat is no longer thinking of the trouble Mole caused. He prefers to focus on their friendship and forgive Mole. As we continue listening to the rest of this story over the next couple of weeks, be on the lookout for the ways the characters let bygones be bygones. Try to find other opportunities to use this saying in your life. For today's practice, I want you to think, how do Rat and Mole demonstrate friendship? We're going to make a T-chart on a new piece of paper. And we're going to put Mole on one side and Rat on the other. Make a list of things each character has said or done so far to demonstrate friendship. Boys and girls, I enjoyed reading with you today. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson in Tennessee's at-home learning series. Goodbye, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Maria Lee, First Lady of Tennessee, and I'm so glad you're here. This has been an unprecedented time for our state and our country. I'm so proud to see how Tennesseans are coming together to serve and lift each other up in the midst of challenges. Each of us has a role to play, including you, our students. Right now, your school buildings may be closed, but there are many opportunities to keep learning. And we are so grateful for the partnership of PBS in bringing this program directly to you as one more way to keep us learning and growing together during this time. I want to also give a special thank you to all of the teachers who helped make this possible. We could not do it without them. Most of all, thank you for joining us.
The value parents place on reading makes a big difference in a child's reading and language development. You don't have to be a teacher or a great reader to create and nurture a love of reading in your child. It's beyond words on a page. It's about using stories to engage your child in the world around them. Start early because language development begins at birth. Exposing children to books early enriches their daily lives and builds strong thinkers. Just having books in the home, no matter your comfort level in reading aloud, can help a child grow to love reading and learning. Let your baby touch, feel, and even chew on the books.
Bah, said Gregory unhappily. Let me see your unhappy face.
Ask your child questions about the book and experiences the characters are having. Use the pictures to spark meaningful, engaging conversation, relating pictures to things in the child's day-to-day routine. Share the joy of books by bringing the story to life. Read with enthusiasm and energy in any language. Try using different voices for different characters.
It's that we're all here together.
Make up a funny story using the pictures, or act out characters and sounds animals make.
Hey.
Encourage your child to copy you and make his or her own noises.
That's good.
And most of all, reading with children and exposing them to books from the moment they're born instills an everlasting love of reading and learning that they'll have for the rest of their lives.